All right, so we're recording, and I'm actually going to share screen. And all right, make sure that are you seeing one slide or two?
One.
All right, I got it right. Okay, fantastic. So in our last installments, we discussed the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The Bar Kokhba rebellion was this bloody and very intense affair that left literally hundreds of thousands of Jews dead. In the aftermath, you have the period of. Hold on, I'm just going to mute everyone. Just give me a second. Okay. So, in the aftermath of that, you had a warming relationship between the Jews and the Roman authorities. This was particularly under what are called the Severan emperors, and the Severan emperors. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi was the stories in the Talmud that we looked at was about how Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi was best friends with Antonius Caesar, and so you have this scenario where now the partnership between Rome and the Jewish people is much stronger. At the same time, you also have this renewed stabilization allows for an entirely new project, and that new project was Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi refining and collecting and finalizing what is known as the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is really the oral law. I could not find any evidence, as I mentioned in our last session, that Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi had actually written the Mishnah down. What we have of evidence of is that he was in charge of codifying the Mishnah, and still in the days of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, they would be repeating it lesson after lesson, and as we demonstrated last time, it was composed to be like a song, so that people could remember it with music. Here this week, we're going to enter into a whole new window of time. The Mishnah has been composed; it has been completed and codified. And then the question is, what happens next? What is what unfolds in Jewish history after that? So sometimes it's very difficult to divorce the Jewish history from the world history, and to a certain extent, that's going to be very important now. The Mishnah flourished; the ability to write the Mishnah flourished because Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi was able to establish a strong political affinity with the Romans. He lived in Tzipori. He was a very wealthy person. He could support a class of rabbis who were dedicated to memorizing, studying, and refining the Mishnah. What happens after that? Well, probably none of us have read it. Maybe some of us have. We've all heard of it, right? This enormous book by Edward Gibbon, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Well, this is when the Roman Empire begins to decline. And you're going to have, as the Roman Empire declines, you're going to have various world forces that are nibbling at the Roman authority from the outsides, and you also have a system of emperors that I think no emperor reaches a natural death, and none of them exceed 2 years as emperors, and so and the change of emperor in Rome can be a bloody affair. It can be essentially a coup d'état every time you change emperors, and so the Roman Empire becomes a very destabilizing influence, and in fact, Gedalia alone, in his book Jews in Their Land in the Age of the Talmud, suggests that massive poverty took place after this period of time, during this period of time just after the death of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, during the decline of the Roman Empire. And as evidence, he cites the Talmud in Gittin. And the Talmud in the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud in Gittin, has the following statement. It says, a man once sold himself to the Ludari. Now, the Ludari are gladiator agents, right? I guess if you've ever seen, what's that movie, Gladiator, right? With, is it Russell Crowe, I think? And Russell Crowe plays this gladiator, right? And there's, I think, a character in the story who's sort of like the agent of the owner of these gladiators. So a man once sold himself to become a gladiator. He sold himself to one of the agents. And then he came to Rabbi Abahu and said, you have to redeem me. I sold myself to be a gladiator. And the rabbi remarked, what can I do? He only did what he did so he'd have something to eat. That this reflects the sense of desperation that was going on at the time, because you had a real decompensation of the secular authorities, which led to massive poverty. At the same time, we're also going to have the end of the Sanhedrin. Now, we at least have the end of the Sanhedrin by that name. When I say the end of the Sanhedrin, let's remember that the Sanhedrin is the high court of the Jewish people, and the Sanhedrin formally can only meet in Jerusalem in what's called the Lishkat HaGazit, the chamber of hewn stone. Now, obviously, after the great defeat, the end of the Great Revolt, the Sanhedrin was exiled to Yavne. And so we didn't have the formal Sanhedrin. But the Sanhedrin, even by that name, comes to its end around this time. And there's a section of Talmud in Masechet Rosh Hashanah 31a and b that reads as follows. It says, it tells us about the 10 stages of exile. And then it gives us an additional 10 stages of exile that relate to the Sanhedrin. You'll forgive me for putting so much verbiage on one page, but I think it's good for us to sort of see how things move along. So it says, let me get my annotator here so I can draw. Okay. Corresponding to these 10 stages, the Sanhedrin was exiled in 10 stages at the end of the Second Temple period, after the destruction of the temple. So first they went from, as I mentioned, the chamber of hewn stone, right? That was the fixed seat at the temple. Then they went to a place called Chanut, which was literally the shop. So I guess there were, like the Mamila Mall, there's a bunch of shops outside of the old city, so they moved there, right? Or something like that, maybe to where the Cardo is, right? So a designated spot on the Temple Mount, outside of the temple proper. So maybe it's where the Cardo is, if you're familiar with the old city. And Chanut, they moved to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to Yavne. And from Yavne, they moved to Usha. Remember, I showed you a picture of Usha. And from Usha, it returned to Yavne again. And from Yavne, it went back to Usha. And from Usha to Shafram to Beit Sharim. Beit Sharim is where Rabbi is buried. You can even go and visit the Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi's grave there. It's very well marked. It's a very interesting site. And from Beit Sharim to Tzipori. Tzipori is a wonderfully preserved city that was both Jewish and non-Jewish. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi lived there. And the final move was from Tzipori to Tveria. And what the Talmud is going to say is that Tveria is lower than all of them. Tveria is a city that sits below sea level. And in the summer, it is painfully hot in Tveria. And essentially, this is the end of the Sanhedrin. It doesn't rise up from out of Tveria. Interestingly, by the way, that this progression is a progression from little small towns. Places like Usha and Yavne were like little dinky towns. They're kind of like, trying to think of, it's like Brackendale, right? And then Tzipori and Beit Shari and Tveria are, Victoria and Vancouver. Those are major cities. So we have a shift. The Sanhedrin keeps moving to great places of greater and greater population size and greater cities. here, what else do I want to tell you about this move? So this move, the end of the Sanhedrin is a very, very important event because it's very hard to develop Jewish law without a Sanhedrin. But the theme of tonight is going to be looking with a defined lens. We're looking at transitions in Torah. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi takes the oral law and he fixes it in this reasonably rigid system called the Mishnah, right? And people spend a lot of time repeating and repeating and repeating these Mishnayot, these sayings. And so does Jewish law sort of become a sort of a stone fixture, or is it going to have certain measures of flexibility? One of the ways of looking at this is this is a lens. Jacob Katz is a brilliant historian of the history of Halacha. His book in Hebrew is called Halacha v'Kabbalah, but I like the name in English better. In English, it is called Divine Law in Human Hands, Case Studies in Halachic Flexibility. What Jacob Katz is interested in showing and demonstrating in this book is how there are a number of different ways in which Jewish law continues to demonstrate flexibility, interpretive flexibility, practical flexibility. That these are very interesting things to note. At least I feel so, especially when you talk about Orthodox Judaism, which likes to pretend like it has not changed at all. I think that is not actually true, and I don't think anybody will actually admit that there has not been any change in Jewish law. Societies change, and therefore the many other things need to change with it. But in this period of time, the Beit HaMidrash starts to flourish, and this is the next thing that you're going to see in this group, this time period, is that after Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, we begin with the age of the Talmud, which is known as the Amoraim. So all these rabbis are in the next stage, and this is a new era, a new epoch. This is sort of one of those dividing lines that they demonstrate. If you look at the timeline of the Jewish people, this is a very significant timeline. Before Yehudah Hanassi, you're a Mishnah author. You're called a Tana. After that, you are going to be referred to as an Amora, someone who is a speaker, but you don't get that feeling. Now we're going to see Torah in conflict for the first time. We're going to see how Torah shifts in change between Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi and one of his disciples who takes over after him, whose name is Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia is actually a Babylonian, and he has come from Babylon early in his years and studied with Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. He was known as sort of one of those student critics. The student who's always sort of the head of the class, who's arguing with the teacher. Now, there's some students who argue with the teacher just to be argumentative, but there are other students who argue with the teacher and they force the teacher to be smarter. That's what Rabbi Chia was. Rabbi Chia was one of those students who had the ability to make Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi even smarter. But the story that I share with you here is one about the argument about Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi and Rabbi Chia about how to study Torah. So it goes as follows. Shuv Pam Echad, once again, there was another time, when Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi Gazar Rebbe Shelo Yishnu LaTalmidim Bashuk. They shouldn't teach Torah in the marketplace. And so where did he come up with this idea? So he expounded on this verse, your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of an artist. So the idea is that, maybe not expected in Vancouver in 2021, but certainly in 221, which is when Rebbe lived, the expectation was that you weren't flashing your thighs around town. And so, since it says your rounded thighs are like jewels, so that refers to Torah. And since Torah is meant to be hidden, so too you should do it only in a in a secluded place in the rarefied air of the Beit HaMidrash, and you shouldn't go out to the market. But what happened is, despite Rabbi Yehudah's decree, Rabbi Chia went out and taught Rabbi Chia's two nephews, Rav and Rabba bar Chana, in the marketplace. And Rabbi Yehudah heard what he had done and became angry with him. And when Rabbi Chia came at some later time to visit him, so then Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi sort of turns the screws on him, and he bans him from the Beit HaMidrash, and he does all sorts of things to make him very uncomfortable. He summons him and then sends him back home. It's a whole story. But finally, when the two of them get together, he asks the following. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi asks Rabbi Chia, "What is the reason that you, master, acted as you did, ignoring my instructions to teach Torah in the marketplace?" And Rabbi Chia said to him, "It's written in the book of Proverbs, wisdom cries aloud in the streets." Right? And Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi says, wait, what does wisdom cries aloud in the streets mean? It says it should be understood in accordance with another rabbi named Rava, who said that someone who occupies himself with Torah study inside the privacy of his home, his Torah knowledge will proclaim his greatness outside, as it will be revealed to the masses and they will see his greatness. So here we have two different views of how Torah is supposed to be studied. On the one hand, you have Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, who says, look, Torah gets studied in the academies. We have a special place, a study hall. That's where you study Torah. And it's not meant to go out into the street. And Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, how does he understand these various verses that talk about Torah should walk aloud in the streets? He says, look, that is the upright character of the Talmid Chacham. That is the upright character of the rabbi. He goes out and people say, you know what? That Rabbi Yehudah guy, that Rabbi Chia man, they are the most honest, kindest people, right? The image of the Talmid Chacham is what speaks to the value of Torah. Rabbi Chia has a very different view. Rabbi Chia is of the opinion that you have to teach Torah in the marketplace. He wants to bring the Torah to the streets. He wants it to be a popular phenomenon. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi is a little bit more of the ivory tower academic. He's a little bit more of the purist. Remember, he's refining the Mishnah. He's working very hard. He wants expert teachers. He wants people who have only one profession, and that profession is Torah. And so we see already that we're going to have a competition between the early generation of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi and those who are living after him, Rabbi Chia, who says, you know what, it's time for me to bring Torah to the streets. So already this attempt that Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi had to solidify what Torah Shebaal Peh was, and to fortify it in a sort of a chain or a clause of very advanced Talmidei Chachamim already breaks down in the very next generation. That very next generation is the generation of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia survives Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi also left a will. And we have that will recorded in Masechet Ketubot. It's very simple. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, if you recall, we saw a statement that said that since the time of Moshe, we never saw political leadership and Torah leadership in the same person. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi had both the political leadership. He was friends with Antoninus Caesar. He was a very wealthy person. He was the Nasi. He was the president, and he was also the well, if not the, certainly the most, if not the greatest, then certainly the most respected rabbi of his day. So he held all the cards, the political card and the Torah card. When he dies, though, he says, look, I am going to divide this into three categories. Shimon b'ni Chacham, he's the sage, maybe he's the wisest. He's the one who gets final authority on matters of Torah. Gamliel b'ni Nasi, my son Gamliel, he's the president of the Sanhedrin, right? And he's got the political power. And Chanina Bar Chama, you know what his job is? Yoshev Barosh. He's the head of the yeshiva. He's in charge of teaching the students. And so Rebbe's three jobs, which would have been the wisest Torah scholar, the head of the academy, and the political leader, he divides those into three. Now, let's just see what happens in the next generation. The next generation, the generation of Rabban Gamliel, we have a very interesting change that already comes about. It says Rabban Gamliel, this is in Pirkei Avot, and by the way, I never read this way until I came to see these in historical context. And so it's important when you read Pirkei Avot that you're starting to read with a little bit of historical context, because I think it sheds some light on things. So Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, said, Yafeh Torah im derech eretz. Excellent or beautiful is the study of Torah when combined with a worldly occupation. Right? What does that mean? So that means, should someone become a rabbi, or is it better to be a significant student of Torah while also being an engineer, right, or an accountant, or running your father-in-law's diamond business, or going into the insurance industry? So Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, says, you know what this time calls for? This time calls for people who both do Torah and also have a profession. And if you remember, well, let me turn it around. I hate that these things are all me talking without any participation. What about the time period do we know that might bring someone like Rabbi Gamliel to say that this is very important? What do we know about this time period? Specifically about the economy. Okay, well, I guess you're going to force me to do the talking. So what we know about the economy... Oh wait, something just appeared in the chat. Let me just take a quick look. Oops. Unmute you. Okay, hold on. Participants. More. Okay, sorry. Okay, now you can unmute yourselves.
Okay.
The poverty of the times.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You mentioned that earlier, so that makes it important that people have a viable occupation.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly where that's exactly where we're going. Is that what we want? Is we know that people need to have a viable occupation, and that in this time period as well, we're seeing two things at least. One is that he's worried that once upon a time people might have been able to live off the fat of the land. There was a lot of agriculture. It was a very prosperous place. They could support a class of Torah scholars. But maybe Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, maybe Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, recognized that, you know what, we better support people. We better make sure that they have the ability to support themselves. And he says, it's a beautiful thing to see people working and living Torah. Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, is also now a contemporary of the aforementioned Rabbi Chia. Remember the aforementioned Rabbi Chia, who was disciplined in the days of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi for teaching Torah in public. Now, we have a bunch of city-dwelling Jews, right? These city-dwelling Jews are much more cosmopolitan. They are brushing elbows with Greeks and Romans and all sorts of non-Jews in big cities like Tiberia. By the way, just as an interesting note, Tiberia was originally built as a graveyard, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Jews didn't live in Tiberia because it was a graveyard, and you had a lot of problems of purity and impurity, and Kohanim couldn't live there, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai worked to somehow structure Tiberia so that Jews could enter Tiberia. And then it started to become more and more of a Jewish city, but it was built as a non-Jewish city. So now you have Jews who are brushing elbows with non-Jews all over the place. And you see that the rabbis want to have a greater influence in the shuk, in the marketplace. Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, let's remember where he came from. He comes from these smaller towns. Beit She'arim, he comes from Usha. He starts in these smaller towns where it's all exclusively Jews. What do you have to worry about? The rabbi's going to take care of you. You'll get your drasha on Shabbat, right? The Beit Midrash is going to get this Mishnah thing straightened out, and we'll all be good, right? But now we have a bit of a different scenario. When they move to Tzipori, and then they move to Tveria, you have a place which is where you need to be able to influence the marketplace. That rather than simply try to field a Beit Midrash by itself as the rarefied success of the Jewish people, you have a generation that sees the world a little bit different and is projecting a mixed approach, a work Torah approach that you see in this next generation. So that's sort of our first case study in halachic flexibility. And these are sort of softer on the edge. How are we going to teach Torah? Where are we going to teach Torah? What's our approach to engaging the masses? But we're also going to see that the economic pressures put us into an entirely new scenario. Again, I forgive all the writing on these pages. There's not that many pictures. I tried to bring out as many pictures as I can, but this is there's a lot of text here. So the okay, next story. Little background for the next piece of information. There is a law called the sabbatical year, the Shnat HaShmita, the year of the rest of the land. There are various rules about working the land in advance of that year. So there was worry that if you work the land, let's say in the month before Rosh Hashanah of the Shemitah year, that you're going to cause people to further violate the laws of the sabbatical year. And so in an attempt to protect that, there was a rule that said you shouldn't work the land, you shouldn't plow the land in the month of Elul, the month that precedes Rosh Hashanah, so that you don't end up violating, in the end of the day, the sabbatical year. So this piece of Talmud says as follows: Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapara. So Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, in the saint of bar Kapara, the following: Rabbi Gamliel. This is Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. Right? What did he say? And his court discussed and then voted about the prohibitions of these two periods, i.e., from Passover or Shavuot until Rosh Hashanah, because there was an even longer period that said you shouldn't work the land in even the 6 months leading to Rosh Hashanah. And they nullified them, thereby permitting plowing until Rosh Hashanah itself, the actual beginning of the sabbatical year. In other words, all of the buffer zone that was part of the halacha that said you shouldn't work the land in advance of the sabbatical year, the Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, this rabbi of the next generation, the son of the codifier of the Mishnah, said, we're getting rid of that rule. So then the Talmud asks, and this is the blue section, Amri le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Zera says to Rabbi Abahu, Amri le Reish Lakish, le Rabbi Yochanan. Some people said it was Reish Lakish who said this to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Gamliel uveit dino heichim matzu mevatli takanta debate Shammai vet Hillel. How is it? Who's this little pisher? Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. Who is he? He gets to uproot the law that was put in place. It was a buffer zone put in place by none other than the great Hillel and the great Shammai. And we know, and this is the next section in white, we know there's a general rule that a later court cannot nullify the ruling of another court unless it surpasses it in wisdom and in its number. Number probably means the number of its supporters. So, are you going to tell me that Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, is greater than Hillel and Shammai? That seems to be an answer that the rabbis could not possibly entertain. And Rabbi Gamliel, it might be a great rabbi, but he's not greater than Hillel and Shammai. So how is he uprooting their edict? So the Talmud comes to an answer. The Talmud's answer is that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel established their law conditionally. The condition was that they established this decree, but should it come at a different time, people find it too hard, so you can undo it. I think, just to reflect on this answer. So this answer seems, okay, we got ourselves out of Dodge. No great theological problems have come. We have not invented Reform Judaism. Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, is not this great religious reformer that we need to be worried that he's opened the door for people to make pork kosher. Right? Whatever rule he undid was a rule that was rife to be undone. It was a discretionary rule. They said, look, it's good for now, but if somebody needs to change it later, fine, change it. Now, I just want to reflect this through my personal experience. I would say about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, we engaged in a discussion about how to freshen up the services at the Shaare Tzedek synagogue. And pretty much uniformly, at the end of services at Shaare Tzedek, I hate to be saying this, but we're perfect, we never speak. Well, maybe just a little bit. And when do we tend to speak? The worst time that we are at the worst decorum is after Musaf, Adono, Ein Kelokenu, Anim Zemirot, Shir Shel Yom. It's a whole big, it's just hard to keep everybody focused at that point. So we had these major discussions about what if we move the Shir Shel Yom to before the service? And what if we get rid of Anim Zemirot, right? So you would have thought that I pulled out the Torah and drew Mickey Mouse in place of Moshe Rabbeinu. That there were people who were just livid. How could you even think about changing these things, right? There are people who come to board meetings and say, I'm here to ensure that the rabbi doesn't change too many things. And I guarantee you that in the grand scheme of things, the start of the sabbatical year, it's connected to a biblical mitzvah. It's much more fundamental than Anim Zemirot. Here you have Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, who, the poor kid, he lives 5 minutes after the end of the Mishnah, and all of a sudden he's changing everything. But you can only imagine the kind of leadership that's going on here. We talked about the levels of starvation that are going to happen because of the decline of the Roman Empire. And we see that this gives us a snapshot of how Rabbi Gamliel is starting to respond to the times. And he is an activist with respect to Jewish law. And you can see this in the way that he goes and starts to peel away layers that, because he is a great Talmid Chacham, he knows which ones are movable and which are not movable. It's a very good thing to know. Sometimes when you go to a very significant Torah authority, sometimes, here's a good example, by the way, is the question of, can you hear Megillah by Zoom? So, hearing Megillah by Zoom certainly doesn't feel kosher. And it's something that under ordinary circumstances we wouldn't allow. Last year we would not hear the Megillah by Zoom. We were still in safe space up until the week after Purim. The week after Purim, that's when things went downhill in BC. But so we didn't have to deal with the question of Zoom. This year, though, I have people who are on chemotherapy and they're recovering from very serious disease. I can't, in good conscience, tell them they have to come to shul to hear Megillah. What am I supposed to do with those people? So in New York, what they're doing is they have enough people and enough Megillahs. People go to people's houses, they read the Megillah at their houses. Fine, you have enough resources to do that. We don't have those resources in Vancouver. And so we spoke to some very significant rabbis who know exactly where all of the goalposts lie, where do the foundation stones sit. And they said, look, you know what? There is some room to say that the electronically reproduced Megillah reading might be kosher. Now, it's only for Megillah reading. It's only in extreme circumstances. You need to treat it very carefully. You need to be very limited with it. But they allowed it for exactly those people. For those people who are immunocompromised, haven't been vaccinated, for whom it's very dangerous to come and enter into the community. So for them, we will live stream the Megillah reading. This is the kind of thing that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel does. Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. But this is a very important moment, because even at the very moment that the Torah Sheba'al Peh becomes codified in the Mishnah, you're already seeing changes in the law. Okay, I'm doing something now very dangerous, not from a theological point of view, but a educational point of view. There is there's a section in the Talmud which deals with currency exchanges. Now, first of all, why is this a very interesting scenario? Imagine the Roman Empire is collapsing, right? When the Roman Empire was extant, the Roman coins were like the US dollar, right? If you carry US dollars pretty much anywhere in the world, you don't have to change money. Most people will take US dollars. I know. I just became a Canadian citizen. You're not supposed to have that. Americans are not supposed to speak that way. But look, I suffer like everybody else with the movement of the Canadian dollar. So I feel like I can be a good Canadian and admit this point, that the US dollar is currency for the entire world, and everybody benchmarks to the US dollar. I imagine during the Pax Romana that the Roman coins were like that. You didn't need to really exchange coins that much. But as the Roman Empire begins to crumble, then you have to deal with the issue of changing coins. And here we're in it's a very interesting case, because Jewish law has another feature. The other feature in Jewish law, and I'm still on background, so you know, is that when you do a transaction, what signifies the end of the transaction? What signifies the moment where the party has acquired the new item and you cannot reverse the sale? That does not happen when money changes hands. That happens only when we'll call it the personal property changes hands. The personal property has to change, not the money. If the money changes hands, you can still reverse. In Jewish law, you only reverse when the fish, so to speak, changes hands. When the fish changes hands, the sale is done. What happens, though, in a case where you are buying gold or silver from the money changer? So which one is going to be the fish? Is the gold the fish, or is the silver the fish, right? Now you might say, okay, well, it depends who's the money changer. But the halacha is not interested in that. The halacha is interested in setting up which is the right one. Now, sip your coffee, wake yourself up, slap yourself across the face. Here's where it's going to get complicated. I'm going to go through this, then I'm going to give you the general principle. I want you to just understand this. And if you ever wondered what it's like to sit in yeshiva, this is what it's like to sit in yeshiva. This is the kinds of things that you're gonna read in yeshiva. So we could go through the Hebrew, but just to keep this straightforward, and because it's already a little bit complicated, I'm going to present this to you. This is the way the Mishnah reads in the Babylonian Talmud. Once again, this is the way the Mishnah is going to read. This is the rule in the Babylonian Talmud. It says, gold buys silver, silver does not buy gold. Meaning, which one's considered the money? Silver is considered the money because gold does the buying. You're right, the gold is the fish. The gold is what is the object of the sale, and the silver is the tender. So gold buys silver. It would, if we were dealing with a fish, it would be fish buys silver. Silver does not buy gold, meaning when the silver changes hands, we don't have a final sale. When the gold changes hands, we do have a final sale. So you might ask, what is the reason why the gold is going to be considered the real money, the real object, and the silver is going to be considered the money? We haven't answered that yet. But you might think silver is always money. Kesef in Hebrew is silver. Good. Nope. Copper buys silver. Silver doesn't buy copper. So, bad coins buy good coins. Good coins don't buy bad coins. So, in the case of a coin exchange, whatever is the worse coin seems to buy the better coin. So the sale is final when the less desirable coin changes hands. The asimon buys a coin. I don't know what an asimon was in the days of the Talmud, but I remember using the Israeli telephones, right? And it had that little token. So it was probably a token that may be used to as a sort of an intermediary for certain things. The asimon buys a coin. The coin does not buy a masimon. Portable property, a fish, a table, a knife, they buy coins. Coin does not buy personal property. So when the money changes hands, nothing happens. When the object changes hands, something happens. So right now we have this situation where what you need to remember is that gold buys silver. That in the Babylonian Talmud, gold is the better of the two. Gold is the worst of the two. Silver is the better one. Bad coins buy good coins. So the gold is the fish in the Babylonian model. Okay, now, new pieces of information. In the Jerusalem Talmud, and I checked this, I pulled my Jerusalem Talmud off the shelf. I couldn't believe it. I never had heard before this that there was a scenario where the Mishnah in the Jerusalem Talmud is different than the Mishnah in the Babylonian Talmud. I thought we had one version of the Mishnah. Who knew that there are now two versions of the Mishnah? But guess what? That's exactly what we have. We have this second version in the Mishnah where it says in the Jerusalem Talmud, the silver purchases the gold, right? Not the gold purchases the silver. In this case, the silver purchases the gold. It's the exact opposite. So what's going on here? So, simple explanation is like this. The Babylonian Talmud takes the following reason. Silver is more common, and therefore it is more preferred. Gold may be a more valuable coin, right? But not everybody wants gold because maybe it's hard to find gold, maybe it's hard to verify the gold. Whatever the value of the gold coin is, it's not what people use on an everyday basis. It's like a $100 bill. $100 bills, sometimes they're hard to break. Not everybody wants a $100 bill, right? Not the cashier doesn't always have change for the $100 bill. So people prefer $20 bills. They're very useful. They're easy. Nobody ever tells you, oh, I can't use a 20, right? So the gold coin here in the Babylonian version is less preferred. And so we'll say that gold buys the silver because the gold is less preferred. What about the case of the Jerusalem Talmud? Well, simple. Gold is more valuable, and therefore it's the preferred one, right? And so, therefore, the preferred one does not acquire. And so we get the exact opposite in the Jerusalem case. What's interesting here is not so much the gold and the silver. And if you didn't follow me about which one acquires and which one doesn't acquire, all you need to know to understand the history lesson is this, is that you have a halacha about which one is the actual preferred, or the coin which closes the sale. You have diametrically different opinions between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And the Talmud tells us why we have this argument. It says Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi would teach Rabbi Shimon his son, When one party takes possession of the gold coins, the other party acquires the silver coins, meaning the gold creates the final sale. That's consistent with the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said to him, "My teacher, you taught us in your youth, when you were younger, Dad, you said, in the first version of Mishnah, when you had the early version of the Mishnah, when one party takes possession of the silver coins, the other party acquires the gold coins. And do you then teach us in your old age? And now when you're older, you teach us the opposite. So, Dad, make up your mind." So the Gemara asks, in his youth, what did Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi hold? So the Gemara essentially goes through the arguments that I just presented to you. And it says that, oops, that was weird. Hold on. The Talmud goes through the arguments that I presented to you. And those arguments are that when Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi was, what did he hold? That he held gold coins which are more valuable are currency. Silver coins which are relatively not valuable, they are the commodity, they're the fish. i.e. they're the purchase item. What happens though is, and I didn't include this part here because I guess I felt that there should be an end to how much text I put in front of you. Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, he favors the position that his father took in his youth. And therefore in the Jerusalem Talmud, which followed him, they changed the Mishnah. This is remarkable. This is remarkable because what we're seeing here is that even though Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi fixed the Mishnah, in the following generations you had rabbis who are going to feel that whatever the market forces are or the realities that are changing, that they're going to have to to adjust the law. And I think that this is fabulously important because Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi fashions and codifies the Mishnah in one particular reality. In the reality of the Jewish community living under the Pax Romana. What we're going to see now is that Jewish law is going to quickly have to shift. The rabbinic leadership is quickly going to have to accommodate to the crumbling Roman Empire, and it's going to have to present it's not ripping up the Mishnah, it's not setting fire to it, but it is taking positions that it understands as bona fide positions and applying them to the current reality. And you have at this point, it's a living, breathing rabbinic leadership. It's a rabbinic leadership that can respond to the pressures of its generation. And I guess the dangerous thing that I did by going through all this discussion about silver and gold and back and forth between them is just, I wanted you to see the kind of argument that they have. And I wanted you to see specifically that the Mishnah has two positions. And the two positions change from one generation to the next. If you recall from our last session, the one time which I showed you that they were going to write down the oral law, that comes from Rabbi Yochanan bar Nafcha. Rabbi Yochanan bar Nafcha is like a young child at the time of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, the composer of the Mishnah, and he becomes the head of the academy at the time of in the year 270, so roughly 50 years after Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, and he represents the last. If he represents the last of the Sanhedrin, when we talked about the end of the Sanhedrin in Tiberia was his Sanhedrin. He was the last properly named Sanhedrin in Tiberia. After that, something like the Sanhedrin did meet well into the Babylonian period, but it never called itself Sanhedrin. And so he lives, he lives at that time period, and it is under his tutelage, he and his sort of study partner, Reish Lakish, they're the ones who say, Eit lasot laHashem. It's time to do for God. We have to cast off the Torah. We have to ignore the rule of not writing the Torah, and we have to actually write the Torah down. This oral law, which is not meant to be written, they decide to write. And in the crumbling ashes of the Roman Empire, in order to save this enterprise that Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi constructed under one historical reality, they have to adapt to an entirely new one. And so we have yet a third scenario where the rabbis are adapting to this this piece. Also, by the way, becomes a reasonably lawless time during this this time period, and it's very interesting. The story of Rabbi Yochanan, this head of the Sanhedrin around the year 270, he actually dies around the year 270, the one who decides to write the Torah down, the Torah Shebaal Peh down, the oral law down. So how does he find his great study partner? His great study partner was named Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan meet one day because Reish Lakish is a highway robber, and he looks to abuse Rabbi Yochanan as he swims probably in the Jordan River or some other river of northern Israel. Literally, there's a whole discussion about how he's on the river, and Reish Lakish thought Rabbi Yochanan was a woman. He goes in to attack him, and then ultimately Rabbi Yochanan is successful in converting him to be a great Torah sage. But we start to see the threads of the instability of the time of the Pax Romana, of the end of the Pax Romana, the crumbling of the Roman Empire, and we see how that the Jewish community had to respond very quickly to this, and they had to adjust the levers of halacha, and they had to adjust their approach to how people conducted Torah in the streets, and they even had to do something as radical as suggesting the writing of the oral law, which ultimately becomes the foundation of the books that we have now, the Mishnah and the Talmud. My hope is that in our next installment we will discuss the Babylonian Jewish community, which both predated this particular moment. The Babylonian Jewish community existed for centuries. Probably, at least at this point, it was 700 years old. But it also becomes very important because the Babylonian Jewish communities will become the center of Jewish learning, which is how we get to the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, that was quite a mouthful. So I'm going to take off the slideshow, and any comments, questions, thoughts? Okay, dangerous when.
Well, it would actually be helpful if you would at times just give us a timeline so we can kind of place all these events and
Okay, so the just to kind of go back over it with a bit of a timeline, Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi is active between the year 180 of the Common Era till about the year 218 of the Common Era. Then Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, let's just say he's going to be 218 to I don't know an end date for him, but he takes over around 218, and let's say he's active for a generation after that. About, let's say he's about to the year 240. Then the next leadership passes to this individual that I mentioned, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nafcha. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nafcha is the one who probably is the one who puts the oral law into written form. And he represents the last Sanhedrin, the last Jewish court that was in Tiberia, in the city of Tiberias. If you want, I can also go back. There's one other figure that I guess I didn't mention in all of that, and that is this gentleman, Rabbi Chia. Sorry, it's not there. Rabbi Chia, who argues, the one who wants to teach Torah in public, he is a bridge figure. He's a student of Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi. So let's just say they worked together from the year 200 to 218, and this argument could have taken place any time in that window. And then this argument about Torah should being taught in the marketplace, let's say somewhere between 200 and 218, and he certainly is going to continue to be a proponent of this. Actually, you reminded me. There's one other story I wanted to tell you about Rabbi Chia. So there's a famous story in the Talmud, in Masechet Menachot, and it is about a man who is obsessed with prostitutes, a rabbi no less, that's obsessed with prostitutes. And he goes and he hears that there's a prostitute in the islands, B'iyei Hayam, maybe in Crete somewhere, and she's fabulously expensive, and he has the means to go see her, so he goes and travels off to the islands to go see this very expensive prostitute. He gets there, and he's announced, and the prostitute takes off her clothes, and she goes up 6 beds of silver, and the top one is a bed of gold, and she sits up there. And then this rabbi goes in, and he himself starts to divest his garments, but when he gets to his tzitzit, they slap him in the face, and he sits on the floor. Now there's this prostitute sitting up on top of the bed, wondering when's her client going to arrive, and he's sitting on the floor in his tzitzis. And she comes down and she says, "By the Capitol in Rome, what blemish did you see on me?" And he says, "By the temple in Jerusalem, you're the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my whole life. But as I climbed up the ladder, the tzitzis hit me in the face and like 4 witnesses, and I realized that this was entirely the wrong thing to do." And so she said to him, "Write down your name, the name of your teacher, and the city where you come from." And the Talmud then says, it uses the very, very specific words. It says, "V'katav v'natan biyada," and he wrote it and he put it into her hand. Those are the words that the Talmud knows are the words that the Torah speaks about a marriage contract, as if this was a marriage contract. Now, also imagine, a student of a yeshiva writing to a prostitute, "Hi, my name is Yankee Ben Sasson," right? And to have his name in the hand of the most famous prostitute might not be great for his shidduch opportunities, right? Anyway, she is seized by someone who has the discipline to refuse her seductive self, and she wants to know what this is all about. So she decides she's going to convert, and so she goes to his Rosh Yeshiva, and guess who the Rosh Yeshiva is? It is Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia is the Rosh Yeshiva. And Rabbi Chia says to her, "Take what you have acquired." He converts her. Clearly Rabbi Chia lives in the street. He knows what's going on. He knows that if this man wrote his name to this woman, that there must be something serious. And ultimately, what happens, the end of the story is a very interesting story, that she preserved the bed sheets that they never slept on that night, and they used them to consummate the marriage. Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz has a beautiful interpretation of this story, which he basically says, look, in Judaism, love is commitment. And what was going to happen that night was just lust. But really, love is a whole different thing, and the bed sheets represent the fact that you can have this beautiful relationship under commitment, and the tzitzit represent the structure of Jewish law, and how being able to be structured in that environment is really the blessing that the Torah gives you. What's brilliant here, or the way I think of this now, is this is Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia is the rabbi who lives in the streets. He teaches Torah in the streets. The student wasn't afraid that Rabbi Chia was going to see this note, because he knows that Rabbi Chia knows his Talmidim. He knows that Rabbi Chia knows the students. He knows their shortcomings. He knows what goes on in the streets, and he would figure out a way to help his student live in the real world. And so Anyhow, that's just an aside on this Rabbi Chia. When does Rabbi Chia live? Again, let's just say he's going to be 200 to 240. He's going to live both contemporary with Rabbi Yehudah Hanassi, the author of the Mishnah, and he is going to survive him as well. Okay, that was probably a longer answer than you may have wanted, but that is the risk with rabbis. We sometimes go on. All right. Nobody else. We're all squared. All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful night, and it's a pleasure sharing some Jewish history with you.
Sure.